Welcome back to day 7 of our Southwest road trip, and today we're going to be talking about the two national parks that call the Land of Enchantment, New Mexico, home. These are Carlsbad Caverns National Park and White Sands National Park, which we had the chance to experience in back-to-back days as a part of our road trip. I'll put a timestamp on screen here if you'd only like to hear about White Sands, but otherwise we'll be going in chronological order in accordance to our visits. So, Carlsbad Caverns National Park can be found in the southwest corner of the state, close by the border with Texas in the Guadalupe Mountains. For those of you who are familiar with Guadalupe Mountains National Park, that is a separate thing, and I do have a separate video on that that's already out about the most impressive above ground scenery in that range. But the reason I mention that so early on is because Guadalupe Mountains and Carlsbad Caverns are two of the closest national parks in the country to one another. Like with other cave national parks, you'll quickly realize that there's not a ton to do here, so I'd highly recommend splitting a day with both parks. You could also theoretically split a day between Carlsbad Caverns and White Sands, which is about 3 hours west, give or take. Carlsbad was established as a national park in 1930 and is renowned globally for being one of the most accessible and best preserved cave complexes in the world. As someone who's also visited the other two cave national parks in America, you can sure as hell bet that I will be comparing these. And I'll start by saying Carlsbad Caverns was the first to truly feel national park scale. Like obviously Mammoth Cave up in Kentucky is the longest known cave system in the world, and Wind Cave over in South Dakota is one of the most intricate and complex. But while you're there, you don't feel like you've entered another world quite like Carlsbad Caverns. The main entrance definitely contributes to this feeling, as it's unbelievably large and impressive the way switchbacks maneuver their way inside. But before I get ahead of myself, I want to quickly discuss the above ground scenery element of the park, which won't take long. One thing that always impressed me about Mammoth Cave and Wind Cave was not only do they feature awesome cave networks, but also some legitimately beautiful above ground scenery. Whether it's Mammoth Cave with its lush forest and green river, or Wind Cave with its untouched prairie and abundance of wildlife. I'll cut to the chase. Carlsbad Caverns National Park is my favorite cave national park by a pretty decent amount, but the above ground scenery is not at all the reason why. As a matter of fact, it is by a long shot the least impressive of the 3 cave national parks in that department. You'll see some small desert hills and occasional rock formations as seen on the Walnut Canyon Nature Trail among other short hikes in the park, but it's nothing I'd call particularly beautiful. There's also little wildlife prevalent in this national park compared to the two, which begs the question, how exactly did this manage to become my favorite? Well, I think I speak for most that the reason you visit a cave national park is, well, for the caves. Above ground scenery can help, but it's not a huge deal if the things you'll see underground are that unbelievable. And I can say with full and utter confidence that this is the most unbelievable cave I've seen in the country. And not by a little, by a lot. What's also amazing is this is the only cave national park that is self-guided. You don't need to subscribe to a tour group whatsoever. This is great because it allows you to go at your own pace and get away from people, which in many ways are the reason we visit national parks in the first place. So what does this experience entail? Well, first you're going to make your way to the park's main visitor center, where there's an absolutely enormous parking lot so you never have to worry about finding a space. You'll make your way inside what is a really well done visitor center and wait in a line to redeem your entry ticket. It's important to note that you shouldn't just show up and expect to see the caves. There is a reservation system via recreation.gov. It's incredibly easy to get your hands on a reservation, so come prepared, that way you don't need to stress about whether or not you're going to get in. Then you'll make your way outside and take a short trail to an orientation where a park ranger will give some basic instructions of what not to do while you're in the cave. Finally, you'll be released and are welcome to take as long as you want from here on out. The underground trail system in Carlsbad Caverns is a whopping 4.2 miles long, including 2.6 miles of paved trail, which is what we, and almost all other individuals who visit, will participate in. This includes the main corridor trail, which begins at the aforementioned natural entrance, and the big room loop, which is a must when you get there. As I mentioned, first impressions were the sheer size of this thing. I couldn't believe how large and also immersive it felt. Quite literally, the only downside was because of how huge it was, there was only so much the artificial lighting placed inside the cave could brighten it up. This was much less of an issue in the second half of our experience here, when the room shrunk down a bit and formations got more intricate, for example the big room. But it was still dark enough to where camera footage no longer would do the trick, hence why the remaining imagery of Carlsbad Caverns in this video are simple pictures taken with our iPhones. But I still absolutely love this first impression of the cave, and it really gets you excited for what's to come. And I'll also add that the trail design in here was phenomenally well done, never taking away from the scenery, but rather adding unique perspectives in a much needed sense of scale. Some of the formations you may see in the cave are of course stalactites and stalagmites, more on that later, and some less common ones such as these columns where stalactites and stalagmites merge. There's also draperies, flowstone, and cave popcorn, which I recognize from my time at Wind Cave especially. These earlier rooms in the cave are spectacular, but only build on themselves until you reach the big room. This is where shit truly hits the fan, and this becomes a world-class national park. Like said, this is smaller compared to some of the previous rooms, but also feature infinitely more more formations. You will see the most stalactites and stalagmites that you'll have ever seen in your life, so much so that there's also a great emphasis on these columns that I mentioned before. They were absolutely enormous and I was in awe. I kept saying it felt like frozen Niagara at Mammoth Cave, which is the highlight of that park, but on steroids. I remember going there and thinking, I doubt caves could get much more beautiful than this, but then here I am a few years later in Carlsbad Caverns seeing something that, again, wasn't slightly, but dramatically more impressive. In total, we spent approximately 2 hours touring the caverns, and half of that was spent in the big room. Take your time, go slow, and truly appreciate this when you're there, because I doubt you'll have ever seen anything like it. I was already thinking before the big room that Carlsbad was most likely going to be my favorite cave I'd ever experienced, but by the time we wrapped up and made our way back to the car, I was left speechless and didn't even think it was close. Without question, a national park that all of you watching should visit at some point in your lives. Alright, now let's move on to White Sands National Park, located in the south-central part of the state about an hour north of Las Cruces. It was established as a national monument in 1933 and then redesignated as a national park in 2019. It covers 145,762 acres and is considered the largest gypsum dune field on Earth. This is a type of sand composed of gypsum crystals, which give it that white color it gets its name from. Like with Carlsbad Caverns National Park, there really isn't a ton to do here. We spent 4.5 hours at White Sands, and it may surprise you when I say this, but that was actually longer than we expected to spend there. And at least the way I felt was that we saw all of the park. From the turnout for the park and the main visitor center, there is a long scenic road called Dunes Drive. This connects all the trails in the park that give dune access. There's 2 minor trails and 1 major one, and the first I'll discuss is the Inter-Dune Boardwalk. This is technically the second trail chronologically, but the reason I mention it first is because unfortunately it was closed for us. This was disappointing, not because it looked to be anything breathtaking, but with so little to already do in the park, I felt like this cut down even more on that. But when it is open, this is a nice 0.2 mile boardwalk which provides easy access for those who might not be physically capable of climbing over the dunes. But to tell you the truth, if you're one of those people, this might not be the national park for you. Our first stop was the Dune Life Nature Trail, which appears pretty much right after the dunes begin to sandwich the road on both sides. This 1 mile loop is very straightforward and you don't actually need to follow the designated path. That's what makes this park different, is it's more of a free-for-all when compared to most others, and a lot of people actually take advantage of this by dune sledding. You can buy a sled and some wax at the visitor center, which we thought about doing, but it is at a pretty steep price, and while we were on the Dune Life Nature Trail, some kids saw that we were filming and let us use their sleds. If you don't have a sled, you can also try to recreate the experience without one, which looks a little something like this. The scenery on the Dune Life Nature Trail was good but not great, as it showcased the white color nicely, but didn't feature particularly large sand dunes and also had an awful lot of shrubbery grown into them. I'm sure there's people who like that about this area, but I much prefer those sprawling views of rolling sandhills where you have nothing disturbing the flow of the landscape. You get this far more easily on the Alkali Flat Trail, which is 4.5 miles round trip for those who follow the loop. But instead, I would highly recommend diverting from the standard route and making your way as far from people as you can. Because not only can you get some real peace and quiet here, but you can also get some of those unobstructed views I talked about without any footprints or shrubs. The further you go, the better it gets, and you start to see these dunes the way that they were meant to be seen. Virtually untouched with that beautiful pattern left behind from the wind which shaped these dunes into what they are. I'm incredibly grateful for the lighting when we visited too, which made the color pop immensely and allowed the shapes of the dunes to stand out more. We spent literally 2 whole hours in the Alkali Flat area because we couldn't get enough of the scene and also wanted to see it at sunset. And that's exactly what we did, and I just remember how crazy it was. Things were breathtaking as time went on and on. The way the dunes look at golden hour is unbelievable and almost have this beautiful melancholy vibe. I just couldn't believe my eyes in this moment. This was probably one of my favorite things I've experienced in any national park. And ultimately, it's what keeps White Sands from ranking at the bottom of my national parks list. How exactly does one judge a location this unmistakably beautiful that has like almost nothing to do? And the same thing can be said about Carlsbad Caverns, which is why I think these two parks have more in common than people realize. They each suffer from the same dilemma, which is why I struggle to compare this to a place like Joshua Tree or Saguaro National Park, which are much less beautiful but have so much more to do. In the end, I don't think either is going to rank particularly high as a result, despite the fact that the Big Room and Sunset at Alkali Flat were both among my favorite experiences I've probably ever had in nature. But because these two parks have the same issue, I can at least compare them to one another and tell you which national park in New Mexico is more worth your time. And while it is a tough call, I think I'm leaning towards Carlsbad Caverns because I don't think I'll ever see a cave in my life that compares to that. On the contrary, I do think it's possible I might see a dune field one day that compares to White Sands, even if its unique color is so cool.
Carlsbad Caverns and White Sands National Park are amazing national parks. They're both very different, but also very similar at the same time. They both don't have a whole lot to do and kind of focus on one singular attraction, but that one singular attraction is absolutely absolutely amazing. Carlsbad Caverns being the caves themselves, and man, they're definitely the most impressive caves I think probably in the entire world. Just the fact that you don't have to do this without a tour, you can do them by yourself, just go explore, and that final big room is unbelievable. There's so many formations, it's so massive. It's just one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in nature. And then White Sands on the other hand is also up there. The whole evening that we spent in the Alkali Flats area just messing around, rolling down the hills, and then watching that sunset, it was just a magical experience. And so while both parks don't have a ton to do, they have singular attractions that are absolutely amazing and make them must-do national parks if you're in New Mexico.
Alright everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to give me a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to Travel Dash for more content like this in the future. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.